If you lose joy, I don't think you have an opportunity. And I think the early specializers, it becomes work-like as opposed to passion-driven. You can see it. People wear it. I think the kids that play with this unconditional joy and passion that are almost naive to what's in front of them, somewhere in there lies the secret sauce. There's too much focus on the advancement in sport versus the participation in sport because there's such great opportunity. So it can be the high school basketball program, and well, we only have one team. Well, why do you only have one team? That's crazy. Only 12 kids can play. There might have been 80 kids at tryouts. So what that tells me right away, is there's 68 kids unserved. Well, right away, we need an intramural program or a rec program or a lunchtime program because those kids shouldn't be turned away. Coaches want to engage with kids that have saucer eyes and big ears that just want to get better. And even if it means a regression before a progression, I think that's a big misinterpretation. I think parents might think that we're just going to drive the stat sheet here. And sometimes that's part of it. But the reality is, to me, it's people that want to be and can be coached.
Qualified advice is a precious resource in the youth sports environment, and Ross Gurney is most certainly qualified to give some. In fact, it's quite literally what he gets paid for. Hey there, I'm Scott Rentoul, the host of Better Sports Parents, a podcast designed to help you, me, and everyone else out there become exactly that, a better sports parent. And we do that through conversations with world-class performers from across the sports landscape. Ross Gurney has worked in that landscape for decades now as a sports agent and advisor. He has clients across numerous sports, but is most known for his clients in hockey, clients that include the likes of Duncan Keith, Zach Benson, and Devon Toews. And while those might be the names you know, Ross has advised hundreds, if not thousands, of clients whose names you may not have heard of because their pathways lead to different places. Ross is also a father. He has 2 children with his wife, and he has had to navigate their youth sports journeys. So he comes at this from a number of different angles, and hopefully his perspective and some of the warning signs he can help point out in the youth sports environment can help you in your journey. So please enjoy this conversation with Ross Gurney. Ross, first of all, thank you very much for doing this and spending some time with us here on Better Sports Parents.
Great to see you, Scott. Thanks very much. The decades makes me feel old, but I guess that's where we're all headed.
Yes, it is. I guess we can call it veteran or experienced or something along those lines. I've never asked you this question before, and you and I have known each other for a little while, but I don't know if it was the movie Jerry Maguire or some other impetus. What inspired the career path that you ultimately decided to pursue?
Yeah, well, the classic line to the Jerry Maguire quote is, "It's not all about running through airports and falling in love." But yeah, I mean, it's so funny that movie arrived when it did, kind of based on Lee Steinberg, a great quarterback agent at the time. But there is a lot of truth to it. And I think about it from time to time. And yeah, they did a really good job with that. And yeah, what inspired me, I kind of got into this business from the inside out way back when I was doing my university in 1988 to 92 undergrad and then graduate work thereafter. If you think about Gretzky carrying the cup around the ice, there were no rink boards even, or this guy named Michael Jordan had just shown up. And sport was just elevating. And I was just so enthralled with that. And I knew what agents were, but I didn't really know what they did. And so many of them were kind of lawyers. And so many of them were, the guy we heard a lot about was Mark McCormick from IMG, the golf agent. So for me, long story short, I got involved in the team side first, the Vancouver Whitecaps, 86ers then, but Whitecaps now. Arthur Griffiths hired me at Northwest Sports, which was amazing. Worked at Orca Bay Sports, which was the building, the basketball team, the hockey team, and the golf tournament. I got to be mentored by some amazing people like Todd Lewicki and Victor DeBonis, names that are still in the game today. with the goal of like learning the game inside out. So ultimately that I could go to the agency side. And that's what I did.
So, how did you make your mark? How did you break into the business at that time? Because as anybody who thinks about it long enough will realize, it's a relationship business as opposed to a lawyer business.
Yeah. And you know what? In simplest form, you just need a client. So, so for me, when I was working at the Whitecaps or again, 86ers at the time, like I got to know a lot of soccer players and they were only playing outdoor soccer in the summertime. They weren't playing indoor soccer. So it wasn't a conflict of interest. I wasn't trying to do outdoor deals for them. I just started doing their indoor deals and I got reps or, you were at UBC playing football and, some of your teammates, I was a UBC guy and well, lo and behold, I had access to floor tickets at the Grizzly games, so I could woo the odd guy with some floor seats and got to know some football players that would be drafted. So the Brian Chews, Will Loftus's, guys like that, Angus Reid, people that you've had on. So from that, you start to garner reps. And for me, I never played hockey growing up, but having worked for the Canucks, there was an unbelievable scout there at the time named Mike Penny, and I asked Mike when I went into this business that, could I shadow him for a little bit? So I met him in Calgary and he told me how to fold my scout sheet. And I looked at the things that he was evaluating. And lo and behold, I found a client. And ironically, the Vancouver Canucks drafted him.
That is very ironic. Of course, your journey in sports and how you were initiated into it began long before that. And we'll jump around a little bit during this conversation. But where was that love born when you were a boy getting involved? What did that look like when you were young?
Yeah, it really just involved like play, and it was unstructured play now that I think about it, like, compared to today. Very fortunate to grow up in Kelowna, in the interior. Kelowna was a very different city, back then than it is today, but and many kids, like, in the neighborhood, and so whether it was street hockey or baseball or playing hoops, like, it was just unstructured, no coaches, and just play. And I think that garnered my love for sport. Ultimately, as you advance through the levels, it becomes more structured. And we moved down to Vancouver, and I found that to be very different. Even the seasonality of things, soccer was at a different season, but it became more structured as I got older. But even today, kind of as an adult, and all the activities I'm in, they're all based on things I played as a kid. And I feel so fortunate and lucky to try to be living this healthy, active lifestyle, but it's kind of around the roots of play.
What was your parents' approach to youth sports? Were they hands off, hands on? Did they push you toward anything in particular?
Mine were totally hands off. Like my parents didn't play anything. Like I drove my own bus, so to speak. Like I'd ride my bike to things. I wasn't the kid getting a drive. I'd hear about sign up for things and I'd come home with the form, and then get my money and my parents' signature and bring the form back. But yeah, it was very like organic and authentic. I wasn't driven to anything. I certainly would be playing catch in the backyard with my dad and doing those sorts of things, but he was never the coach or driving me towards things.
So, how did they support your sports journey? Because obviously, you made your way into organized sport.
Yeah, I think it's just the ability to I think they just wanted healthy, active kids. Like, we're older, you and I, but like, the video game age wasn't totally there. Like I grew up on Frogger and Donkey Kong and Miss Pac-Man. Like it's completely different. So, we were just outside a lot. And we're very, very fortunate in the neighborhoods that I grew up in that there was always older kids and we kind of were all the same. And there was this kind of this halo effect of like, you participate and play and it's competitive and your best friend, you get in a huge fight with at the end of the day because of a sport, but you come back the next day and you want to play again.
Well, and it was a very different era, and I think parents who are watching or listening to this can relate to that era because it was very unstructured and you did play a little bit of everything, and it was just who's around, who's available, will make it work with whoever is there. It's a much different sporting environment here today, but as we continue with your youth sports journey, was there ever a sport that you wanted to pursue and actually set your sights on at some point?
Yeah, I had some very good coaches like along the way. I was a soccer player, I guess, growing up, like when I started to try to like get more into a structured and more elite category. And then I loved basketball and aspired to, be a basketball player. There's a problem with that when you're 5'10", but and no 3-point line at the time. That's how old I am. But yeah, soccer and basketball were kind of my sports. And then there was the recreational sports like golf and tennis and skiing, which I absolutely love and love to this day. But yeah, along that journey, as it got more structured and you aspire to things, you really try to embark on like, what could I do with this sport? So you'd have dreams of like, I want to play in the NBA, but all it took was for you to play the Richmond Colts, and you realize that, oh, there's better players in town.
Yeah, at some point it ends for all of us. And for those who are most fortunate and really love sports, that ends after a professional career somewhere. But for most of us, it ends long before that. But if you're fortunate like you and I, you pick up this lifelong passion for sports. And
Yes.
be one, it could be multiple. When you look at the youth sports environment today, obviously it looks a lot different. Just surveying that landscape, what do you see?
Well, my lens is a bit unique because I'm looking at it from a lens of like, I work in professional sport on a daily basis. That said, my wife and I are a father of two kids, a son and a daughter, who have both participated in sports and in vastly different types of sport. But what do I see? Like, I see a lot of really good parents making an effort through volunteerism, getting coach certification, and really trying to enable sport to happen, which I think is fantastic. The machine doesn't work without the volunteer. On the youth side, though, I see a lot of kids that are early specializers, which I think is concerning and a topic in unto itself. And I see a lot of kids that are maybe, I would question whether they're in the sport for their own passion or somebody else's passion.
So when you look at that as a professional, forget about as a father for a second. When you look at that as a professional who sees players ascend to the highest level of sport, and we're talking a variety of sports here, early specialization, you said it's concerning. Why is it concerning for you as a professional?
On the physiotherapy side, it could just be the fact that like you're using the same muscle groups time and time and time again, and that can lead to long-term injury or unsustainable dynamics. I think it limits the potential for joy in sport, like the passion that sport and all sorts of activities can bring. Yeah, it's concerning because the journey's going to be different for everybody. If you lose joy, I don't think you have an opportunity. And I think the early specializers, it becomes work like as opposed to passion driven. And I think I have concern with that.
Have you met in your professional ranks those children who appear ultra skilled but don't have that joy? And you can tell at that point that it can't work for them with what they either say or their parents say they want to pursue.
Absolutely. And whether it's a glass ceiling or, to use a business word, a ceiling of complexity, like you can kind of foreshadow in the GPS, what speed bumps they're going to encounter, what landmines they're going to encounter, what exits on the highway they're probably going to take. Yeah, exactly that. Like you can see it. People wear it. I think the kids that play with this unconditional joy and passion that are almost naive to what's in front of them, somewhere in there lies the secret sauce.
Well, you said it a few minutes ago. You see a lot of great volunteerism. You see parents who are in it for quote unquote the right reasons. Unfortunately, that changes for a lot of people. And some of it is succumbing to the pressure of the environment right now. Why, when people in a logical moment seem to know this, does their passion get turned into something different from your viewpoint?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's such a good question. I'll just use hockey as an example. Like, I think I come from the premise of all of us are good people. The reality is good people can do crazy things from time to time. So I'll give you like the hockey analogy. It's like someone could be deemed a crazy hockey parent because hockey's their kid's chosen sport, and they're timing ice time and counting second assists and very involved and constantly comparing themselves to others. But that same kid might be on the high school football team And that dad, as an example, isn't as invested in football. And as a parent, he's just super happy to see his kid with his friends playing football. It doesn't matter that he only plays special teams and doesn't have an offensive or defensive position, but their context is different and they're there for the right reason. So how can the same parent have two different emotions with the same kid? And that reality is that, using the hockey analogy, there just seem to be more vested in outcome as opposed to just vested in the process of their kid having a great opportunity. And you see it time and time again. I use football and hockey as the example, but it could be anything. It's the sport they specialize in versus the sport they have fun in. And our attitude changes because we're tying it to a result.
Were you able to avoid those pitfalls as a parent yourself because you had seen it so many times over? Or did you have to go through a couple of those valleys before you evolved as a parent?
That's interesting. Actually, my kids had the benefit of growing up with me in the car and listening to me on the phone. So, my son Ryan would tell you no one makes it because like he's heard all the stories. But yeah, there was a point like in my son's hockey journey where he'd go from like a triple A Pee Wee player and then into an academy or hockey school model. And then, realize that, wow, there's a lot of really good kids. And knowing what he knew from me and observing the phone calls that I would have or things that he was slightly privy to, there did come a point in time where he had to say, Dad, I don't think I want to be a hockey player. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a super cool conversation. It was something that he had to come to, but he naturally then fell into other things. And those other things were more revolved around school sport and ultimately school sport. He gravitated towards track in the end and did very, very well. But yeah, I do remember that period, and almost like a vortex that he was almost like being sucked in to this hockey identity. And it might have been because of what I do for a living.
You mentioned that he's the one who came to you and said, "This isn't what I wanna do anymore. I don't think I'm going to be a hockey player." Was that a moment of relief for you? Was it a conclusion that you saw coming at some point in time? And how were you able to, I suppose, remove yourself from that decision and let him make it on his own? Because I think a lot of parents struggle with that, Ross.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And look, you want them to be involved in something, because being active and being in group setting and working towards a goal and dealing with adversity, all those things are really important life skills. But yeah, he came to me like, as you watch them play and celebrate wins and, they're all advancing. Yeah. Does your mind kind of go forward? Of course it does. That's human nature. Like, oh, what would the next level be? And if they did it at the next level, what would that mean? And what opportunities could be presented? That's normal. And of course, my mind would go to those places. But I don't know if it was so much of a relief. I was just kind of like proud of him for kind of recognizing in his case that hockey didn't have to shape his identity because hockey's the family business. It was cool. It was really cool.
As you know, I've had a number of professional athletes or former professional athletes on the show, but I've never had an advisor or agent. And I know for athletes who have children, there is that pressure of the last name on the jersey. Did your son or daughter ever feel that? And did you ever feel it as someone who was there trying to be a parent as opposed to being an agent in the stands at your children's games?
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, and again, I'm just a humble guy, and my last name doesn't mean anything compared to some of the people you've had on your show. But I didn't necessarily broadcast what I did for a living because you wanted to be there to enjoy your kid's sport. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as people started to learn or understand what you did for a living, they would come with a plethora of questions. There's a time and place for all those questions, but ultimately what you're trying to do is just help people be informed and slow them down a little bit and let them know that there's a time and place for it.
When you say slow them down a little bit, what do you mean by that?
I think everyone's always in a race. Like, you get the parents that like in advance know who next year's coach would be. And then they end up like seeking them out for like the summer training so that their kid almost gets 2 or 3 months head start with that trainer, knowing that that coach will be the coach of the rep team the next year. So that sort of stuff is like crazy, right? Like, so the slow down thing is like, whether it be multi-sport, like, geez, there's seasonality to all this. Like, play in all seasons, play all the sports that are available to you. It could be the fact of like the extra training. Like, just slow down. You don't have to constantly be working on the skating. Like, give it a rest. Like, sometimes the best way to improve skating is just to grow and get stronger. Like, it's less to do with what's on ice. So it's all those sorts of things. Like, just you can have the GPS, so to speak, to, type in the destination of where you want to go. But at the end of the day, you do have to ride in the car. And it's just kind of staying present. And it doesn't mean that you don't have hopes or dreams or want to be informed, but I don't think you have to be calculated.
Well, I think you're right. Most parents do want to be informed, and I think they are curious. And I share your belief that most people are good people and they're trying to do it for the right reasons. They just might need some guidance. That's literally your job, is advising. So imagine you encounter questions all the time. What are the most common questions that parents come to you with?
That advising bubble or topic that you just brought up is a really good one, though. And just not to sidetrack, but like, listen, the business of sports starts for different people at different times. And I say business, and it's like, whoa, like, your listeners will be like, business, like, we're talking about youth sport. But the business can be any number of things. The business can be like, do I leave my local association and go to an academy? Well, that's a business because there's huge fees associated with that and this perception of return on investment. The business can be like, oh, our son or daughter are working towards a college scholarship. Well, if any of us are reading the news today, we know college scholarships are now a business. Things like in hockey, like the Bantam prospect draft. Like, all of a sudden, you've got teams evaluating, 14-year-old kids, and they're being evaluated by like people that might be, are on salary with a professional organization. That's a business. So I think, you can't necessarily blame parents for wanting to be informed. I totally agree. But that business of sports starts at different times for different people. And that's where they need to seek out advice and counsel, because you can't always rely on, people in the neighborhood. And oftentimes it's like parents of firstborns that are embarking on this for the first time. They have like the first reps, and ultimately parents of kids with two or three or four siblings would say like, oh, well, we made a mistake on the first kid, but we're not going to make that mistake again. And there's this kind of learned behavior. So I think advisement is certainly important. The biggest questions to answer your question usually come around like, what does the next level look like? What do we need to be doing in order to get seen? Who should we be working with? What can we expect when we get there? Things like that.
I'm not in that world professionally. Obviously, with my profession, I've been around it. So the way I see it is probably different than you. But I hear that question, what do we need to do to get seen? And there's a part of me that wants to roll my eyes because I feel like in the age we live in, pretty tough to hide now and that you don't have to do anything special. Am I on the right track or is that off base a little bit?
No, you're totally on the right track. And just again, to speak to hockey, like these kids that are in the CSSHL, literally every shift they play is available online. So you're talking about, you know, 13 and 14-year-olds, every shift they play all season is available online. So you can be scouted and evaluated. In your and I's age, you used to hear the word highlight tape. A guy would make the highlight tape, and a dad or a brother would show up with a tripod and a video camera, and they'd film every game. And then you'd sit on the weekend and splice your tape, and you'd do a highlight tape, and you'd get the addresses and mail it out to the college. And then, I could only imagine how many tapes a school would get. But like, you know, is that it? Like, those are your highlights? Today, people are evaluating just shift by shift, game by game, and you can't hide.
No, I'm with you. And Steve Nash is the classic story that many Canadians will know that put his VHS tape together,
Yes.
sent it out to a plethora of schools and got one call back from the United States. It worked out pretty well for him, but Steve Nash would
Amazing.
never hide or have to do that type of groundwork in the day and age we're living in right now. As you describe it, Ross, you work right at that intersection. You work at that intersection of youth sports and potentially the business of sports or professional sports. How does life change for both the players and the families who cross that threshold?
Yeah, and for different sports, it happens at different times. So, like in most of the matriculations, kids are moving on to a college sport after grade 12. Hockey's unique and it's changed so much in the last 3 to 4 years with different rule changes. But hockey, there tends to be a bit of a delay where after grade 12, kids could still play junior for 1 or 2 or 3 years before going. But the biggest change in that intersection is like number one, kids are moving away from home. And that can happen after grade 12 for a college player, but it can happen earlier for someone that's specializing. So it could be a basketball player going to a basketball type academy. It could be a hockey player going to play junior. It could be any number of sorts. Because just to say you want to specialize doesn't mean that that's afforded to you in your own hometown. So I think moving away is the big thing. With moving away, there comes a number of things. You know, it's growing up. It's the learning how to cook, it's doing the laundry, it's not just like the to from with mom and dad, and it's not just playing your activity. And then when you move away, it's that distance. Like so many parents, whether it be recreational or some level of competitive sport, the thing we all miss the most is the car ride, because it was just an opportunity. And some parents would take the car ride to a totally different level. But in my case, like I just enjoyed driving my son or my daughter and their teammates and just hearing the banter and their perspective or the fact that they just got over it and would just, continue on with their day. Whereas as a parent, you're overanalyzing everything. But I think the biggest intersection between youth sport and some level of be it college or professional, is the moving away and the fact that there's just different influences and we can't account for every interaction we have with them. And our only viewpoint on what they're doing is their interpretation of what happened. Because often when you're able to watch your son or daughter participate, you have a viewpoint as well.
With some of the sports you mentioned where you're pursuing them, let's talk use football or soccer as an example. Yes, there are academies, but in many cases you're going collegiately, and so you're making a decision about your next step the same way that most kids would be making a decision, or young men and women would be making a decision about their post-secondary dreams. It's just a different avenue to pursue. But with something like hockey, as you mentioned, it's happening much younger. You described the era of youth sports you grew up in and how different it is today. Have you ever had any internal conflict about that when you are talking to 14-year-olds and their families?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, not to give away my secret sauce, but oftentimes I sit in front of a family and I was just reminiscing with a client's father the other day. We were in Seattle watching a Kraken game and Buffalo was in town. And the dad said to me, he said, "I remember when we first met." And I said, "Uh-oh, like what happened there?" And he's like, "No, it was fantastic." He said, "One of the first things you said to me is like, this is embarrassing that we're sitting here talking to a 14-year-old about professional aspirations." And it's so true. Like, yes, there is a conflict. Like, the reality is that family needed to know about the business of hockey. They needed to be informed. There was a bantam draft coming. Their son was clearly elite and on a trajectory towards something very, very special. And the other people in my business, be it other agents, were embarking, were coming. So they needed to be informed. And ultimately, their process started. For some people, that does start early, and for others, it can start much later. But yes, you are conflicted with that because they're so young. And as I get older, and my son and daughter get older, it is super weird to be meeting with families who have children younger than my kids. There is conflict at that intersection for sure.
Well, as proven by the fact that this family's child went on to play and continues to play in the National Hockey League, he was in fact elite. But you say that word and alarm bells go off for me because we see it so often in youth sports today, and we see it at younger and younger ages. I feel like it gets thrown around carelessly, and I feel as though there's a tie to an identity at such a young age that it can be harmful in many cases. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, elite is a dangerous word, but identity is a word that I'd like to come back to as well. But elite is a dangerous word because what is it? Like, what is it by definition? And you're talking about a moment in time. And absolutely, there's a tiering of players in all sports at all times. And not only during seasons, but courses of seasons, even within games, there's tiering. Like, what is contribution? Like sometimes the greatest contribution can be something that isn't deemed elite. It can be being a great teammate. It can be making an outstanding defensive play. It can be picking someone up when they're down. Like there's so many variations to what contributes to a successful culture. But I agree with you. Like the word elite's thrown around way too easily, and it's thrown around within almost like a jurisdiction that is very small because we only know the space that we're watching. And the world is a very big place. So, an elite kid in the lower mainland might not be an elite kid in the province, who might not be an elite kid nationally, who might not be an elite kid internationally. And as we grow that pie, I think the definition of elite almost becomes obscured because it's like it just looks foolish.
Do you feel as though that labeling and the fact that so many different businesses, let's just call them what they are, because they're skill development or their academies, whatever they happen to be, and I'm not saying that they all have nefarious intentions, but elite gets tied to so many of those programs. You think it gives children and their families the wrong idea about what the outcome is supposed to be?
Yeah, it caters to a few, doesn't it? Like these camps are really catering to masses, but they have branding maybe in them called elite. And the reality is like they'll always celebrate the win, and the win is defined as oh, the player that made it. But so many people that might have participated would make it in different ways. And what is the definition of making it? Is making it being compensated to play professionally? Is making it having your education paid for because of sport? Is making it building a number of personal traits that are going to help you for the rest of your life? Is making it building friendships that you can keep for an eternity? Is making it, um, you know, you know, playing sport at an older age like I do and getting great joy and satisfaction from it. Like, so I do agree with you. The word's thrown around too quickly. It's branded inappropriately. I think people's perception is it's tied to play and play only. When in my opinion, it could be so many things.
The environment gets blurry because of the business of youth sports now compared to what it used to be. And like you said, there are a lot of people who can help, but some of those people also need to pay their mortgage. Within your world of agents and advisors, do you have some, without naming names, do you see some organizations, some self-proclaimed gurus or development experts that you stay away from simply because you know they're more salesmen than they are helpers?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And there's definitely sales to all of this. At the end of the day, they all have to put food on the table and provide for their family. And it's amazing that there are so many options. But really, what's happened is I think people are that development category. I don't want to use the word preying on, but they're preying on the idea of like people will want more. And it's unbelievable how much consumption people will take in order to have this perception of getting better. And you and I both know that if you put in time at anything, you're going to improve. And oftentimes, what these things are, they're just reps, and they're almost cookie cutter or puppy mill in approach, but it's just reps. And to get back to that word identity, what often needs to happen is these offerings aren't specific to anyone's unique identity. And having, your sport was football, my sport was soccer, and we all live in Canada and everyone talks about hockey. But what we all have to realize is that, like, it would be amazing if you could type into a computer, based on my skill set, what is the perfect identity for my role, like for me, to have the most success in sport. And if success was only defined by, I'll just say my world, contractual earnings. Wow, isn't that interesting? Because what is best or elite today isn't necessarily what's going to give you the highest ceiling on your potential. So in Canada, we all look at the National Hockey League. Every one of these guys was the top scorer on their team. Like, we can all attest to that as they were coming through. But someone has to be a fourth line left winger. Well, what are the habits and traits of a fourth line left winger? And who's willing or earliest to adopt to developing those habits and traits so that they can become a fourth line left winger? Well, what camp is catering to being the sixth defenseman or being the fourth line left winger? No one. They're all catering towards this camp of elite. And the reality is, elite by definition, might be someone doing the game as a professional. And that might not be the same skill set for everybody. Everyone's going to have a different repertoire that they need to choose from. And, I often think of that analogy of typing into the computer, what would maximize my potential? And it isn't necessarily common for everybody.
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier in this conversation, passion. And there are
Yes.
certain individuals who have so much passion for the path they're pursuing that they are willing to do the things that don't show up on the scoreboard
Yes.
directly, and they're willing to do the things that don't show up on what we referred to as highlight tapes earlier because they want it that badly that they're willing to do whatever it takes. And I
Yeah,
think
and sorry to interject, but like that's what we do with some of our athletes. We create an internal scorecard or an internal stat sheet that isn't really defined on the traditional stats. So to use hockey as an example, there's games played, goals, assists, points, plus minus, PIMS. You can keep going. But the reality is those are traditional statistics. Well, what if we created a stat sheet that was unique to that individual, that celebrated or advanced the things that they're passionate about that others aren't prepared to do? Well, all of a sudden now they're constantly being reinforced by things that are advancing their ceiling. And if you can do that, it's amazing. That's when you realize potential. Yeah, special things can happen.
I think most people are translating that to the professional environment or the high performance environment, but everything you just described to me is what good youth sports coaching and environment should be as well.
100%.
That's not just exclusive to those who are going to go on to make a career out of this. That should be your U11 soccer team, that players understand that they all have value and they all have contribution to what the team is doing together, whether they're the one scoring a hat trick or not. Has that been what you've observed both as a parent and a professional in the youth sports environment?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. My son had he's had so many fantastic coaches. Gary Hunter, Paul Pulver, so many of them. But I remember an instance where Paul Pulver went around the dressing room during a playoff series, and it was elite AAA, Pee Wee hockey, elite, right? Using your word. But that's how it's branded. But he asked each of the kids, kind of, they did a 360 almost review of each other, and he asked them, they look at a kid and they'd ask everyone to, like, yell out what that guy's contribution is, or what, and it could be anything, like, he's our goal scorer, fantastic. He blocks shots, great. Well, like for my son, it was like the kids decided it was face-offs. Well, lo and behold, they're up 3-2. It's the end of the game. They need to clear the puck. There's 15 seconds left. And my guy, who doesn't play a ton, because of the structure of AAA hockey, but he came out to take the key face-off because everyone in the group knew that he was branded as the face-off guy. Well, lo and behold, because of that confidence and belief from others, and the coach set that kind of mentality, no one questioned it. And the kids then, when the face-off was won, they celebrated that as a contribution to winning. It wasn't scoring the goal, it wasn't saving the puck. but it was a contribution, and they identified contribution in all of them. For some of the kids, it was, oh, he keeps us loose. He's funny. They all had something for each other, and it was kind of like an empowering moment. It brought them together.
Do you feel as though those traits are undervalued by the general population who are around youth sports? I think if you played on any team, you realize the value in it, but I'm not sure everybody does because they're so concerned with who scored, who's on the stat sheet, who, I guess, in the case of where your intersection is getting scouted.
Yeah, we have it all wrong, don't we? Like, we truly do, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it's mixed up, and we have to change kind of our mentality on what's important. And in youth sport, to me, it's about participation. It's about joy. There's absolutely a physical benefit. But I think it's this emotional benefit, like being the father of a daughter, like, and you with daughters, like, there's no skill that I want more for my daughter, regardless of what she participates in, than confidence. And it's amazing to see confidence grow in somebody. If that's what sport brings, that's what I want. But I don't want them in an environment where confidence is being crippled or encroached upon because things like winning or, you know, having to feature one player over another is put ahead of that kind of growth of camaraderie and confidence and joy.
It sounds like you had a very healthy approach to what you wanted your children to get out of sport. Can you expand on that? And now that you have a 19-year-old and a daughter who's still in the high school grades, what has sport brought to their lives?
Yeah, what has sport brought to their lives? Like, I think it's given so many opportunities for them to just grow as people. Like, sport to me presents challenge, it presents uncertainty, um, but at the same time, it's the ability to get through something. It's the ability to work towards a common goal. It's ability to sometimes stand down yourself and let others rise. And there's just so much good that comes out of it. But in our family, sport has been very good to us, and it's kind of like a pillar of how we teach for other facets of our lives.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I do think that coaches and parents out there should understand that you do need to be explicit with your children and with those you coach as to what does translate to real life. We can't assume that the children are just going to pick up on this. We have to point out specific examples and show them how it translates as well and how they can use that in other aspects of their life if they're going to get the full benefit of it. One of the things you said earlier, and I think it's fair, you said you didn't really want to use the term preying on, but you couldn't think of a better one at the time. And I think that's a way to view certain aspects of the youth sports environment. You know this as well as I do. There will be those that hear the term sports agent and think of those who prey on families or prey on young people who have these aspirations to pursue a career in sports. At its best, what is a sports agent? Or at their best, what is a sports agent in your opinion?
Yeah, and a lot of people would have the wrong idea of a sports agent. Like, it's kind of become a nasty word because the sports agent is involved in the player getting immense contract earnings, sometimes forcing a trade, leaving town, those sorts of things. The way that I view a sports agent specifically is if you picture a Ferris wheel and there's a bunch of different seats on the Ferris wheel. And those seats can be everything involved in sport. It can be, I'll just use hockey as an example, but it could be skating and it could be dryland training and it could be nutrition and it could be sports psychology. And those are all things you'll need in order to develop and grow. And then it could be business things. Like, if you make it, it could be things like accounting and legal and finance and that sort of stuff. It could be things like branding and marketing. But the reality is like an agent gets paid to negotiate a contract, but ultimately, I think what the best agents are is they become this insulating blanket or the center cog of the Ferris wheel that, the player is in the center and all those tentacles of the wheel are what touch them at various times of their career. And for me, I like to, use the analogy of just becoming an insulating blanket around the family or the player so that they don't need to embark on any of those things alone. And in so doing, you become an advocate for your player, but you also become a voice of reason because in the family business, you're in the business of one, your son or daughter. In the agency business, I've, maybe had hundreds go before you. I can inform, I can share past experience so that as families navigate their process, they're not, I guess they can be informed in their decisions. And I think that's all people want. Like, in order to make it in sport, be it college athletics or professional, the reality is the difference between the player that does and the player that doesn't, it's always a fractional sliver. So if you get involved with an advisor or agent, you just want to make sure that they're aiding to your process, because if there's mistakes made, you can miss it. You can miss that opportunity, you can miss that window. And so I think the best agents are the ones that become insulating blankets and can garner and bring the experience that they've had with others forward so that families can make informed decisions.
Whether it's a coach or in your case, an agent slash advisor, there's this whole spectrum of results with the players and families that you work with. And people see the ones at the top end because they turn into a Duncan Keith or a Devon Toews. But there's on that spectrum a whole bunch of other players and families who had those dreams and thought at 15 or 16 it might work out that way, but perhaps did not go past the junior level or past the university level, but have become members of society that contribute in other ways. Do you get just as much satisfaction out of those stories as you do about the ones that people see on sports pages anywhere?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I just had a young man get a college scholarship this morning, which was fantastic. But one of the guys on the coaching staff at this university is a former client of mine. He's now coaching college sport. Super cool. Or I had a player, a former client, call me the other day to just say that he was just brought on with the fire department. Very, very cool. I've had a dad last week call me. We hadn't been in touch in probably 10 years. And he said that his son is about to embark on the Bantam draft. Like, oh my goodness. But he valued some of the teachings and learnings along our journey. And he wanted to just check in to tell me about his son and say, has anything changed? Or are we still, in an overcook approach? So a big philosophy for me has always just been that, kids should play level appropriate and kind of overcook. But he remembered that. And, some 10 years later since his pro career was over, and he now has a child embarking on the business of hockey, he reached on call. So absolutely get great satisfaction throughout all of it. I was in Seattle, as I mentioned the other night, at a different game. This time it was Seattle, Colorado, and I have two clients on Colorado. And I looked down on the ice and the dad nudged me and he said, "Oh, so great that you've got two clients out there." And I said, "Well, I actually have four." And he said, "What do you mean?" Well, one of the referees and one of the linesmen were former clients of mine. So I took great pride in that, their NHL dreams didn't get to where they wanted to. They both signed professional contracts, but they left the game of professional hockey, but they embarked on officiating. And so we had a good chuckle about that.
So is that what signifies a job well done to you? A positive relationship that spans perhaps a lifetime as opposed to a number on a contract?
Yeah, it's so true. Like at the end of the day, like you just want to involve yourself with people that share similar values and philosophies that you see in yourself. And do you embark on this as friends? No, you don't. It's a player client relationship. But ultimately you absolutely gravitate to people that friendships are built out of that. And I think for families of like youth players that are trying to advance in sport, like ultimately you know, they have the information and they can garner as much information as they can, and they might not know who to trust along the journey, but if you can find an advisor in time, if you need one, that ultimately you can build trust and rapport over time, ultimately you'll grow together, and through that growth comes immense friendships. And it can be with, I have friendships with parents of clients to this day, and I certainly have friendships with clients.
I want to touch on what you said a minute ago about overcooking because in today's youth sports environment, whether it's children or their families, everybody wants so much so soon. Next level. Can I play in this tournament? A travel team here or there? But you mentioned overcooking and you mentioned the term journey a number of times as well. Can you expand on what overcooking means and why you think it's a positive thing for youth in sports?
Yeah, I just think everything's just it needs to revolve around play. And everyone's always wanting to advance so quickly through the levels, or there's always the next tournament or next travel team, and so on and so on and so on. And it's great that those things are afforded to you and available. But at the end of the day, I think you really have to assess and take stock. And for me, when I assess and take stock, like I really believe the best way to improve isn't where you travel to or what team you're on. I think it's getting the reps, playing the game. And sometimes instead of advancing and as you move from like a participation sport more into a structured sport that might have a path towards more of a driven type result sport, I think you have to be very careful like to not diminish your role because you're ultimately being evaluated for what you bring on the day. So in hockey, for example, are you better off to be the youngest player on a team playing in a diminished role or be on an age appropriate team playing in a bigger role. And, kids move from, say, in hockey, like in the U18 level, that's ultimately a 3-year age group, 15, 16, 17, versus then they move to junior hockey, which is a 16 to 20-year-old age group, 5 years. So sometimes instead of being the bottom, aged player in a bigger age group, it's better to overcook and play more level appropriate reps so that you can be closer to the identity that you see yourself as in the future. And it's no different with the US college model, Scott, that you would know well, but like, generally speaking, freshman plays less than sophomore, sophomore plays less than junior, junior plays less than senior. Well, there's always the super freshman that comes in that blows the whole thing up for sure. But you just want to, I think, not be in a rush to move up levels to be at the bottom rung again. Because ultimately, if you can play a more vast role, be involved in more scenarios in the game, you're only going to improve. And there'll come a time for specialization for sure. As the pyramid narrows, there'll come a time for specialization. But I really believe in overcooking. I really believe in exploring the edge of all of your potential instead of getting slotted into something that's very narrow.
One of the things you said earlier about slowing down, I think is great advice for parents and families out there, but I also think it's difficult to navigate because youth sports progresses so quickly for certain children that things and options get thrown at families very, very quickly. And in many cases, you or someone who works in your business are the guy they think they want to meet. I want to have an advisor. I want to talk to an agent. I want to get on board. From your perspective, have you ever met children and their families and said, I know this is a talented individual, but this isn't for me because I see warning signs here?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for me, that's just part of my brand ethos, if you will. Like I just have decided there'll be other people that work in my space that would be like, oh no, like we'll take it on because, you want to work with the best players or those with the best potential. But yeah, I think warning signs could be things like mom or dad wanting it more than player. Like it has to be player driven passion for sure. I'm sure that's a theme throughout your conversation with others. Um, I think the other theme is like when the going gets tough, like, are you digging in and bearing down and working on things? Or are you like, oh, it's someone else's fault? Coach, other players, I need a trade. So that's a second warning sign. The journey isn't a straight line, as we all know. And the journey certainly isn't always escalating up. Sometimes it descends. I think a player that is conflicted on what success looks like is a tough one as well because you just can't control the voice in their own head. So someone that's constantly worried about the stats as opposed to being worried about the team, that's a warning sign for me. So it's generally around those three areas.
One of the things that I see happening in youth sports, especially as there's that ascension to different levels, is that there's what coaches or programs actually want, and there's the perception among parents or among younger groups of what they think they want. When you talk to those organizations and you talk to those coaches, what kind of athletes and people do they actually want in their programs that we consider high performance or elite?
Yeah, that's a very good question too, because it's not only players that are trying to advance, you also have coaches that are trying to advance, therapists that are trying to advance. So everyone's trying to advance. So people will say crazy things to be involved with the best people. So the perception and reality between what people want can often be mixed. I think parents think that coaches are always going to want players that are like statistically driven and are like so far separating themselves from the herd. But the reality, what coaches want, in my opinion, is kids that want to be coached, great listeners, kids that want to do it the right way, are open to learning. You oftentimes hear the coach explain a drill, and then kids immediately think competition. So they do the drill as fast as possible. But then the coach would often whistle down the drill and say, no, 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 we want the drill done this way. I think what coaches are looking for is kids that can be comfortable in the uncomfortable, that are doing things the right way. Because if you can be a coachable kid and listen with your ears and your eyes, like I think that's so important for parents. It's no different than conversation when you introduce your son or daughter to someone. You want them to look them in the eye and give them a firm handshake. It's the same with coaching, like those tentacles or those cues. Coaches want to engage with kids that have saucer eyes and big ears that just want to get better. And even if it means a regression before a progression, I think that's a big misinterpretation. I think parents might think that, like, oh, we're just going to drive the stat sheet here. And sometimes that's part of it. But the reality is, to me, it's people that want to be and can be coached.
I think there are warning signs with parents or families when they're trying to put them in. And you just mentioned some of them that coaches or organizations might identify. On the flip side, for parents who are looking at organizations who are pitching them on coming or why their child should come, what do you see as warning signs for parents where it's maybe head a different direction?
Yeah, I think when organizations put winning paramount, winning is a professional thing. Winning may be a collegiate thing, but I think we all get great joy out of winning. But I think the real win is in the process of trying to win. And you may or may not win. Like at the end of the year, only one can win. So I think we have to, like, parents that are listening to programs that talk about, like, we're getting the best kids and, we're going to win and all out, we're going to do this. Like, you know what? Like, I'd stay clear of that. Like, I'd really wanna work with people that talk about practice to game ratio. Practice is where the improvement comes. Game is just like, let's put into game what we learned in practice. I think, you'd really wanna hear about, like, that through practice to game ratio, like, what type of development opportunities are there? Is it all internal with staff, and is it the same for all, or do you segment kids' needs and bring in the best people to support those needs? So some individuality to it. I think development comes not only in the output of sports skills, but I'm really big on the intrinsic, like what's happening to the athlete inside. The old adage of feel good, play good. Like, I'd really want to be involved or hear cues from programs that really support the person. I love programs that actually check in with their athletes every day. I heard from a coach a couple years ago, and it sounded crazy because I didn't want to mix it with like the Mike Babcock checking your cell phones, but he made everyone come in and put their cell phone in a bag. And I was like, well, why do you do that? Is it so that people decrease the screen time? He's like, no, it gives me 30 seconds to check in with every kid. And I was like, that is kind of cool. So it can be quick conversation, but just the idea of looking each other in the eye, saying good morning or good afternoon, and just kind of getting a sense of like, what did it take for them to show up today? And then through those visual cues or spoken cues, the coach could then adapt. And I just thought that was kind of forward thinking.
So what you're describing to me is a coach or an organization that is there in service of those he or she is overseeing. And it makes me harken back to the very first episode of this podcast when Allison Forsyth said, be wary of coaches or organizations that tell you they produced this many hockey players, they produced this many Olympic athletes, because they didn't produce them. They helped guide them. It's not about them. And I do think that is one of the warning signs. Would you agree?
I totally do. Yeah, it's like it's about the individual and it's about the program, but the reality is like it's the chicken or egg. Like you need a great programming and you need great individuals to produce great outcomes. But what are the outcomes? Is it winning or is it individual advancement or is it just personal growth for everybody? The reality is that when we find programs that are evolving and constantly growing and supporting that growth in everyone, that's where I think we see total advancement.
Now, we spent a lot of this time, because of the nature of what you do, talking about that intersection of where it goes from youth sports to really pursuing a high level pathway. But one of the concerns I have right now with youth sports is that we see this statistic all the time about the drop off rate at 13 years old. Part of that to me, as I've continued to have these conversations and I see the youth sports environment, part of it is the fact that I don't think we have enough recreational pathways for teenagers. It seems to be this gap. We've got them for adults, we've got them for very young kids, but at 13, it feels like, well, you're either on this competitive track or you're not. Do you see that as a major issue with youth sports today?
I do. Like it shouldn't just be what's the frisbee game called? Ultimate. Like it shouldn't like stop playing baseball and go to ultimate. Like where is the recreational baseball? Stop playing soccer and go to ultimate. Like, you know, there has to be more. Like I really believe that there's too much focus on the advancement in sport versus the participation in sport because there's such great opportunity. So it can be the high school basketball program, and well, we only have one team. Well, why do you only have one team? Like that's crazy. Like only 12 kids can play. Like there might have been 80 kids at tryouts. So what that tells me right away, is there's 68 kids unserved. Well, right away, we need an intramural program or a rec program or a lunchtime program because those kids shouldn't be turned away. You know, how are we to know when someone is going to find their calling in sport? And you only learn that through play. Yeah, I would hate to see a time or a place where, well, there's only so much ice time, there's only so much pool time, there's only so much court time that we can only cater to the top level. There's so many others that want and need to play, and I think someone's gonna figure that out, and more kids should be playing. Like, why do intramurals I didn't know what intramurals were until I went to university. Like, why weren't they afforded to me in high school? It could have been super cool, and who's to say it only has to be uh, interschool. Like it could be diversification of schools and, not to get into the tiering, but just the general category of intramurals is such a good thing. And then there's the whole co-ed participation. I didn't participate in co-ed sport until I realized what beach volleyball was, but it's some of the greatest times I've had. Like, why wasn't that introduced earlier? Like, and if it was, some of my social awkwardness as a high school guy maybe would have been alleviated because I would have been interspersed with, others in co-ed settings to just participate and have fun and what joy and learnings come from that. So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of going to a high school that had a great intramural program, and I have some amazing memories from high school,
Right.
which then carried on to intramural programs in university. I was certainly the beneficiary. I know there are some school districts doing it. I would love to see more. I'd love to see it all the way across this country. Ross, we've touched on so many different issues across this conversation about youth sports, and I'm not sure if one stands out above others to you, but I ask most of the people who come on this program this question, and I'll pose it to you now. What do you currently see as the biggest issue in youth sports today?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's just access. Yeah, access would be a big thing. Like, I would want everyone to have access to as many opportunities as they could possibly have, because I think through that access, we can unearth the potential greatness in everybody. The second thing I think is facilities. I have a deep concern about facilities and keeping the facilities to standard so that kids can be in the right environment, be it safe, safety within the facilities or just the progression of facilities so people can keep advancing. Like it bothers me to no end when I drive by elementary schools and high schools and there isn't mesh on the basketball netting because none of us like to hoop when the ball goes through the iron thing. How can there not be a net program in this province? Or you drive by playgrounds and like the soccer goals are pushed to the fence, like they're not even repositioned after the lawn's been cut. So it's things like that because I think, we all grew up just by playing. And I think when we limit play, we're limiting opportunity and potential in everybody. And I would love for sport to just get back to more authentic participation and not so much structured participation. Because I think some of my greatest memories as a child and the memories that I carry forth today in my athletic pursuits were fostered, in that environment. I love what I love today because I just had an opportunity to play.
That's very well said and a great way to end this conversation. Ross, thank you so much for giving me and all the other parents out there who are watching or listening some insight into your world and your perspective. Thank you so much for spending your time with us.
I'm very happy to do that, Scott, and continued success with Better Sports Parents. You're doing a great job.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.